Today we're going to have a look at a Mercedes with a Delphi CRD3 ECU, or more specifically the file in the ECU. The vehicle was at a local garage and our customer was asked to go out to it to find out what was going on, because it wouldn't regenerate its DPF filter and it kept going into limp mode, but every scan tool that was plugged into it said the same thing: no fault codes found. So you think no fault codes, no problem, but that is not the case here. The fault codes were never the problem. Somebody else had already been in the ECU and has left behind one of the cleanest examples I've seen in a long time of how not to do this. If you're new here, welcome to Bike Flash. My name's Rob. We supply ECU tuning files, calibrations and technical support to tuners and workshops, as well as technical training and file analysis. Today we're going to have a look at a file off a real customer ECU and have a look through why it's so important, if you are providing tuning to your customers' cars, that you choose a software company that really understands what's going on inside the file, so you're not doing this to your customers' cars. So here's the history. The customer with this Delphi CRD3 powered Mercedes had an AdBlue delete carried out, but whilst the previous tuner was in there, they switched off a whole list of fault codes. We can see a lot going on here, and it keeps dropping into limp mode, but there's no warning lights worth trusting, and crucially there's no stored codes for anybody to chase or use as a diagnostic. So every garage plugs in, sees nothing, clears nothing, sends it on its way. The van's been treated as a mystery, but it isn't a mystery, it's this file. It's all sitting there right in front of us, and we're going to have a look at that today. So a quick orientation for anybody that hasn't seen one of these. This ECU keeps a table of fault codes, and each one is a fixed length record here. They're 20 byte blocks per code. Inside of that block there's the identifier itself, so this one here being P229F, and then there's a set of words that control how the fault behaves. So how it's stored, how it's detected, how the reaction triggers, and then how it heals, so how it clears or stops limping depending on the type of fault code. So hold that thought, because these words are the whole story today, and we're going to revisit that in a minute. When a tuner disables a code, they neutralize that whole record. So when they do it lazily, or a poor automated solution gets involved, then they don't, and I'm going to show you the difference in this video. Firstly, however, I'm going to leave the fault codes, and we're going to have a quick look at the file slightly further up here. So when our customer went out to look at this vehicle, they wanted to get in their own head the state of the vehicle, and they noticed that all the exhaust gas temperature sensors were reading 0 degrees. Now, 4 EGT sensors don't fail all at once, and they certainly don't all fail to the same temperature reading. So that's clearly not a sensor fault, that's a file issue, and we can see that here. So when the previous tuner deleted the AdBlue system, they went into these temperature sensor linearization tables, and these turn the raw sensor value into a temperature. So a voltage comes back from the ECU and then it gets converted into a temperature. So if we look at this one, we've got voltage across the top, we've got the temperature in there, and then we can see 1.68 volts is 425 degrees, 1.79 volts is 500 degrees, so on and so forth. But these have all been zeroed out, so they all read 0 all of the time. And that is the same for all 4 of the sensors. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 in here. You've got pre-cat, post-cat, DPF, AdBlue, etc., etc. But all of these sensors, they've all been set to 0. So these are the curves that return that temperature to the scan tool and return it to the vehicle. So where they flatten them, whatever the sensor genuinely sees, the ECU just resolves it to 0. So the engine now behaves like it's in the Arctic, and it makes every decision off that. It waits for the EGTs to become warm to do a DPF regen. They never get above 0 degrees, and it moderates fueling to keep EGTs safe, so hot day, sustained load, climbing up a hill. But it no longer does that either. So now we've got risk of engine damage. The list goes on. Then there's the code list. So let's go back to the fault codes. You can see there's massive amounts of codes that have been delivered here. And there's a whole stack of faults switched off here that have nothing to do with AdBlue and nothing to do with EGR. They're on systems that were never touched. And this is just a DTC off routine that somebody's run. It's hammered the table. I don't really know what's gone on. Obviously we weren't involved, but we can just tell you what's here now. But the problem is, even on a working van, this is how a small problem quietly grows into engine out, or we need an engine now, because all the early warning signs of a problem have been removed. But there is one code, probably more than one, but one that jumps out at me that could potentially explain the limp mode. So I'm going to find that and we will have a look at that one, which I believe was further down the file here. Yeah, so this one here, P0088, which is fuel rail pressure too high. And I've actually found 0087 somewhere else in the file as well that's disabled the same way, which is fuel rail system pressure too low. And both of these I would expect to limp the vehicle. But crucially with these is what they've done in terms of deleting the code. This word here they've set to FFFF. So that's the disable flag. That's them telling the ECU this code can never mature, it can never store. And it doesn't. It never lands in fault memory, so it never shows up in a scan tool, and that's why every garage sees nothing. But if you look at the rest of the record, everything's still live. They've set the storage flag and stopped. They've never touched the rest. And that's why it matters. Inside the ECU, it's detecting the fault, storing a fault, and reacting to a fault. They're three separate stages. The monitor detects a symptom and the fault qualifies internally. That qualified fault then feeds two separate paths. You've got one which writes the code to memory, so the garage would see it with a scan tool, and then the other fires a reaction, whether that be an engine light or a limp mode or both. And those two paths are independent. So when they only kill the storage flag, the fault still qualifies, it still fires the reaction. It still drops the van into limp mode. It just never writes the code that would tell anybody why. So essentially they haven't disabled the fault, they've just disabled the ability to see the fault. And that's the difference between switching a code off and understanding what you're switching off. A proper disable neutralizes the whole record. If we go further up the file, some of the others have been done correctly. Up here you can see that the storage has been disabled, but also all the other words to do with the detection and the reaction and healing have also been done as well. And then on top of that, some reactions don't even live in the code table. There's things like sensor plausibility and substitute values for a sensor that reads wrong, and those will fire regardless of any DTCs. They're elsewhere in the ECU. And that's why just turn the code off doesn't always fix limp mode, and it frequently just makes a car undrivable and undiagnosable at the same time. So with this, what we're going to do with it, well, we're not going to be patching this patch. It'll be a whole new stock file, reinstate all of these values, and then if the customer wants to do something, obviously they can tell our customer, and we can deal with things properly on a system by system basis, carry out any tuning that needs to be done, and keep all of the ability to diagnose the vehicle in place. We can restore that temperature linearization. Hopefully then they'll be able to recover the DPF and get it doing some regens, and we can just restore the whole strategy of the ECU back to how it should be, and just get the van back to a baseline that's honest, and the sensors read real numbers and the codes mean what they say, and then the garage can do their job. If you got something out of this, then subscribe, because here we are going to keep pulling more real files apart on this channel. There's plenty more like this. We see poor remap files day in day out, limp modes, lights with no codes, you name it, we've seen it. And there's a good chance if you've got a problem with one of your customers' cars, the chances are the problem is sitting on the file. So cheers for watching, and I will see you on the next video.